Hello and welcome to Commercial Real Estate Explained, where we help people make informed decisions about commercial real estate. So our question for this video is, what is an LOI? Maybe you're working with a broker and a lender already and you're hearing this acronym thrown around and maybe nobody's explained to you what it is. More than just the acronym, I want to make it clear how it fits into the commercial real estate buying process, so you understand when people are talking about drafting an LOI, like what does that mean? So once again, LOI stands for letter of intent. What's interesting is when you go to buy a residential home, when you make an offer, it's usually, at least in California, on an executable contract. Essentially, you're giving an offer to them that if that buyer decides, I'm taking it, they sign it, you are immediately in contract to purchase that building. I think this gets back to a little bit of how residential real estate is a little more streamlined, designed to go faster. On a residential deal, when you make an offer on something, you're essentially sending them a contract that they can sign and you're immediately in contract. Commercial real estate, for better or worse, just goes a little slower. So, you can submit a contract when you make an offer. I know that there's some brokers that prefer that. Largely what I see is an LOI structure. So essentially, let's say you find a commercial building that you like and you and your broker talk through the numbers and you feel good about it. You essentially have him put together a letter of intent that basically spells out what you're willing to pay for the building, how much time you need for the transaction. It's almost like just the most basic terms of the deal, what you're willing to spend and what you're willing to do. And then the seller of that building is going to look at your LOI and decide whether to accept it or whether to counter you. But what the difference is, an LOI is not usually executable and it's usually non-binding. So essentially what it means is it's a letter that says, hey, these are the terms that I'm willing to pay. But if the seller says, you know what, I'll take it, you're not immediately in contract. Essentially, the next step is you have to draft a purchase and sale agreement. We'll talk about that in the next video. But a few things to know about LOIs is, once again, it's almost just like an extra step between, making an offer and being in contract. One of the things that's really important is they're generally non-binding. There's going to be language on there that says, this is what we're willing to pay for the building, but we are not obligated to go into transaction and go into contract and pay that unless we agree on a purchase and sale agreement and go into contract. And another thing that's a little bit different from residential is LOIs are custom. Different brokers have different styles in how they write them up. Generally, there's a few different terms that are present in most LOIs, but it's basically just the first step towards negotiating a purchase and sale agreement. Unlike residential, it's much less streamlined. What I do like about an LOI is it allows you to make a little bit more of a slower, more gradual move towards buying something where you agree on the basic terms first, you send them over and you see how the seller responds, versus residential where you make the offer and all of a sudden you're in contract and you're off and running. I personally like that for my clients because it gives you a little more time to get your ducks in a row, get organized, and think more about what could be a very large purchase. Another thing to keep in mind is that LOI terms become the basis of the PSA. So you don't want to throw out terms that you don't believe in or terms that you don't think you'd actually agree to, because oftentimes the basic terms of the LOI become the purchase and sale agreement. So although they're non-binding, it's negotiable, there's not necessarily like a set format. Oftentimes, the price you're willing to pay, the deposit you're willing to put down, how much time you need for the transaction, that's established in the LOI. And although it's not binding, it does set the tone for that's what you're willing to do. So when it comes to the purchase and sale agreement, if you change your mind and say, I actually want to pay $200,000 less, that's just not going to be seen favorably because that's sort of something you already agreed to on the LOI. A question my clients will ask me is like, why do we take this extra step? Why is this something that you do in commercial, but you don't do it in residential? I think the answer is that purchase and sale agreements for commercial real estate, which we'll get into that in the next video, they're complicated. There's a lot more to it. It's not as straightforward as buying a home. There's all different types of commercial real estate. Sometimes it's vacant. Sometimes there's there's rent in place from a tenant. There's just a lot of different things that go into it. And the purchase and sale agreements have usually been more of a custom nature. The seller is going to have an attorney draw them up themselves. And so there's just a little more back and forth, and it's something that I think people don't like to be rushed into immediately. What I like about it, as I alluded to earlier, is that when I'm representing a buyer, it gives them more time to sort of warm up to the terms in the transaction, especially if you're a first-time commercial real estate buyer. Putting together an LOI is a great way to understand the basic terms before you dive into a 20-page purchase and sale agreement. I think it's kind of a nice, here are the basics to keep in mind, and let's understand that, and then we'll send it over, and we'll see how they respond. Also, because it's non-binding, it allows you to kind of dip your toe in and learn, am I even in the ballpark of a number that the seller wants, without having to put together a complicated purchase and sale agreement and read through and understand all 20 of those pages. So that's basically what an LOI is and how it fits into a commercial real estate investment. The takeaway is that you're not going to do these on a residential deal for most, in most cases. But in commercial, at least in my experience, and what I recommend to my clients, is to send an LOI first so that you can understand the basic terms. Thank you so much for tuning into this video. I hope you learned something. If you got some value, please hit subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.